So, Washington is ground to a halt. As of 2025, the US government is officially shut down. And honestly, it's a standoff with no clear end in sight. We're going to break down exactly how we got here, who's getting hit the hardest, and, what could possibly happen next.
Yep, it's official. At the stroke of midnight, October 1st, 2025, the federal government basically closed up shop. Now, this is the first time this has happened since 2019, and it brings a whole cascade of consequences that we're about to get into. But first, let's just ask, what does a government shutdown even mean?
Okay, so in the simplest terms, a government shutdown happens when Congress just can't agree on a budget. Think of it like this. The government's credit card gets declined. When the funding dries up, all the non-essential services just stop, and hundreds of thousands of federal employees, they get sent home without pay.
All right, so how on earth do we get here? I mean, this didn't just happen overnight. This is the result of a really high-stakes game of political chicken on Capitol Hill. It's all rooted in this one fundamental disagreement that's created a total stalemate, and right now, nobody sees a way out.
So at the very heart of this thing, you've got two completely different game plans. On one side, you have the Republicans. Their position is, look, let's just pass a temporary 7-week funding bill, keep the lights on, and we can argue about everything else later. Kind of kicking the can down the road, right? But the Democrats, they're drawing a hard line in the sand. They are refusing to pass any funding bill unless they get a deal to protect these critical healthcare subsidies. And that right there is the core disagreement that slammed the brakes on the whole government.
And the Republican strategy, which you can see perfectly in this quote from Senator John Thune, is basically a war of attrition. The plan is to force a vote on their funding bill every single day. They're betting that the pressure of a shutdown, the headlines, the furloughed workers, will eventually crack the Democratic Party and get enough of them to flip their vote just to reopen the government.
But the Democrats, led by Senator Chuck Schumer, they're making the exact opposite bet. They're convinced that the public is going to point the finger squarely at the Republicans. Their whole strategy is to frame this shutdown around the potential loss of health care for millions and millions of Americans.
Okay, so let's really zoom in on this healthcare fight, because this isn't just some abstract political talking point. We're talking about a specific policy with massive, real-world consequences, and it's become the one thing that neither side is willing to budge on in this whole budget battle.
So what's at the center of this storm? It's these enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, you probably know it as Obamacare. These subsidies, which were first put in place during the pandemic, are what make health insurance premiums affordable for millions of low and middle-income folks across the country.
And if you want to understand just how big of a deal this is, just look at that number, 24 million. That's how many people signed up for an ACA health insurance plan this year, a record high. And that huge surge was driven almost entirely by these subsidies making the plans affordable. So we're not talking about some niche little program here. This affects a huge slice of the population.
And this is the financial cliff that Democrats are desperately trying to avoid. If these subsidies just expire, a nonpartisan analysis predicts that insurance premiums could literally skyrocket by an average of 75%. I mean, for millions of families, that means their health insurance bill could almost double overnight.
So you can see this isn't just some political squabble in D.C. Let's talk about how this directly affects you and people all across the country. And we'll start with the federal workforce itself.
Yeah, the most immediate, brutal impact is on federal workers. Just look at this chart. We're talking about an estimated 750,000 people, the vast majority, who are now furloughed. That means they're out of a job with no paycheck coming in. And then you've got the essential staff, people like air traffic controllers. They still have to show up to work, but they won't see a dime until this whole thing is over.
Okay, so what about for the rest of us? Well, it's kind of a mixed bag of what's still running and what's not. The really critical stuff like your Social Security checks and Medicare, that's going to continue, thank goodness. But a lot of other services are going to be disrupted. National treasures like the Smithsonian museums, they're closing. Need to get a passport? It could take a lot longer. And some really key resources for our veterans, like the GI Bill hotline, they're just suspended.
And all of this brings us to the biggest, most crucial question. What happens next? And the honest answer is, nobody knows. Right now, there is no clear off-ramp. Both sides seem to be digging in for a long, drawn-out fight, and frankly, nobody in Washington seems to have a clue how it ends.
The playbook for each party is pretty much set in stone at this point. The Republicans are just going to keep forcing these daily votes, hoping to crack that Democratic unity. And the Democrats, they're going to keep blocking those votes, holding out for real negotiation on health care. It is the definition of a classic political stalemate.
You know, this quote from Republican Senator Josh Hawley, it just perfectly captures the mood on Capitol Hill right now. There's this deep sense of frustration and really a stark admission that millions of people are paying a very high price for a political standoff that has no obvious solution.
And so, that leaves us all with the one central question. With the government closed and with millions of Americans caught right in the middle of this thing, who is going to blink first? As the pressure builds and the real-world consequences mount, the entire country is just waiting to see which side finally decides the cost is just too high to keep going.